What's the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? Story 1. I was the sole witness to a killing. I have told this story before. I was in a Jeep with the top down, waiting for two men on the sidewalk to stop arguing. One of them pulled a blade out of his sock and drove it, stiff-armed, into the other man's eye. The sound was sickening. He took off running. I rushed over and saw blood spurting from the man's face onto the sidewalk. Long story short, he was gone by the time the ambulance arrived. I was supposed to testify in court, but the man who did it pleaded guilty and got around 20 years, if I remember correctly. It was a long time ago, but not long enough for me to ever forget that sound. Story 2. I was a kid and it was Christmas Day when we heard a knock on our front door. Expecting family, my dad and I opened it together and found an old man asking for directions to the train station. Our house was right in the middle of suburbia, so he must have been walking in the wrong direction for hours. My dad gave him directions and offered him a ride, but he declined and thanked us. As he left, he looked down at me and said something really strange. "Never go to that place that scares you." He was extremely old and moved with a shuffling pace. We shrugged off his words as harmless confusion and went back inside. As he was heading down the path, it began to rain, so my dad grabbed an umbrella to give him. But when he stepped outside again, the man was gone. My dad ran down the path and searched up and down the street, but he was nowhere to be seen. The place that scared me was a shack in the woods I used to pass on my way to and from school, which always gave me a bad feeling. A few years later, someone was arrested for taking the life of a child there. Story 3. I work as a dog walker. One of our clients was a very wealthy and well-known coin collector who lived alone with his dog and struggled with alcohol. He was a kind man, though he often smelled of liquor and looked disheveled when we picked up his dog each morning. One Monday, I went into his large house and saw him on the couch as usual, appearing to be asleep. I called his name, but he did not stir. He was half on the couch in a strange position. When he still did not move, I walked closer and saw his eyes open, with blood coming from his nose and mouth, and his hands discolored. I panicked, rushed outside to the patio and was sick, then dialed 911. They told me he had likely been gone since Friday. He lived alone with no family or close friends nearby, so I was the one who discovered him. It was heartbreaking because he was such a nice man and not very old. To this day, I still have nightmares of his face and eyes in that moment. Story 4. At the start of this year, an article came out in our local newspaper about a school director and former teacher accused of serious crimes involving children. 2 days later, my mom called me because it turned out to be my former teacher and choir master. She had received a call from the police asking for my contact information so they could question me. Before that, I had already spoken with a friend about possible victims, since we both had known him and were active singers. I told the police the names of people we suspected, and a few weeks later they invited me to give a statement because sadly, our fears were confirmed and at least one person truly had been harmed. They asked about the possible time frame since the person's age meant the case was treated as abuse of a minor, which is even more serious under the law. I felt sick to my stomach, but it did not stop there. About a month later, I spoke with my parents again, and they said it had become almost common knowledge that he had been using narcotics and that there were probably many more victims. That was crushing. Then I remembered that back in primary school, I once shared a room with him during a choir trip. I barely recall anything from that trip, and not knowing what might have happened has haunted me ever since. To make matters worse, the choir was Catholic, and the church never took any action about it. Story 5. Back in college, a buddy of mine and I were really into paranormal stuff and loved researching supposedly haunted locations. He was talking to a girl he liked, and she told him about an old abandoned house not far from her parents' place in the countryside. She suggested we should investigate it. We agreed, so one night the two of us and a couple more friends headed out. On the way, we picked her up and met her father, who was a volunteer firefighter. He told us there had been a fire in that house that tragically took the life of a baby from the family who lived there. Afterward, the family abandoned the place, and it had been vacant for months. That made us even more curious, so we decided to go see it. Once we arrived, we could tell there really had been a fire, and the family had left all their belongings behind. As we moved through the house, the atmosphere felt increasingly heavy and sad. The girl and the other friends got uneasy and went back to the car, but my friend and I continued to the baby's room. When we walked in, we saw a perfectly white wedding dress suspended in the air near the crib. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a baby crying. We froze in fear, unable to move. The crying went on for about a minute until logic kicked in, and I began wondering if there might be a real baby trapped somewhere. We started searching frantically and realized the sound was coming from beneath the floor. I rushed outside toward the crawl space under the baby's room, but before I could check, a figure crawled out from under the house and charged at me. Completely panicked, I shined my flashlight, and to my shock, it was the girl's father. It had all been a prank. Once my heart finally calmed down, we laughed it off. But even though it was fake, it remains one of the creepiest experiences I have ever had. Story 6. I was living in a rental house about 10 years ago. The back door opened into a narrow enclosure right next to my neighbor's house, with their bedroom wall directly beside it. There was a light socket out there, but I never used that area for anything, so I had never put in a bulb. At night, the space was always pitch dark. One day, my neighbor told me they had heard noises in my backyard, like someone jumping down from the wall onto the concrete. They said it had happened multiple times and thought it might be a thief. That worried me, so I bought a bulb and went to install it. The socket was high up, so I had to stand on a tall wooden stool to reach it. That night before bed, I switched it on from inside my house, and the backyard lit up completely. The next morning, I did not step outside. I just turned off the switch and left for work. On the second night, when I flipped the switch, nothing happened. The space stayed dark. I tried several times, but the bulb did not light up. Thinking it might be defective, I decided not to check that night because I was uneasy about the dark and the possibility of a thief. In the morning, I finally looked, and the bulb was gone from the socket. At first, I thought someone had stolen it, but then I saw it lying intact on the ground. It should have shattered from such a height, and even stranger, why would anyone remove it only to leave it there? I tested it inside, and it worked perfectly. I screwed it back in and went to work. On the third night, the bulb lit again when I switched it on. Around 3 in the morning, I quietly opened the back door to check, and the place was dark once more. I quickly shut the door and went back to bed. In the morning, the bulb was on the ground again, still unbroken. From that day on, I avoided the backyard as much as possible and never tried putting another bulb there. As far as I know, no thefts were ever reported in that neighborhood. Story 7. When I was a kid in New York City, my mom and I always used the train or bus to get around. You can imagine the strange situations I came across growing up, but one memory has stayed with me. One day, a homeless woman who seemed to be under the influence of something stepped onto the train I was riding. She started shouting random nonsense, which was not unusual, so at first it did not alarm me. But then she suddenly stopped and started laughing while staring directly at me. Still looking into my eyes, she wet herself and said something like, "Those dreams are never going to stop." At that time, I had been dealing with recurring nightmares for years, waking up crying without even knowing why. Her words terrified me to the core. Maybe it was just a disturbing coincidence, but I never forgot it. The nightmares eventually did go away, but the memory of that encounter has stayed with me ever since. Story 8. I was a little drunk one night and went to hang out with this guy I had been chatting with on a dating app for a while. He was really cute. I took the bus to his place, and we spent a couple of hours in his living room watching TV, cuddling, and making out. He had roommates, but they were not home that night. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up in the middle of the night, around 3 in the morning, I was completely alone in the living room. I figured I had passed out and he just went to bed upstairs. Since I did not want to wander around a dark, unfamiliar house, I decided to just quietly leave. I got on the bus home, and it was almost empty except for one other guy who got on. He was wearing the exact same outfit as me, a navy blue puffer jacket and rusty red chinos. It was so strange that I even snapped a picture showing us both and posted it on Instagram with the caption, "Dress code at Club Midnight Bus." I even said something to him like, "I like your taste in clothes," but he just stared at me in silence. It felt bizarre. The next day, I messaged the guy from the night before saying something like, "Sorry, I guess I passed out while we were cuddling. Hope your day is going well." But he never replied. We had been talking casually for months, had great chemistry, and he had even been the one to invite me over. Everything felt fine, until I woke up alone on his couch. After that night, he never spoke to me again, even though I still saw him online. The strangest part? He ended up dating the bus doppelganger I saw on my way home. Out of all the people in this big city, of all the bizarre timing, it just felt surreal, like some kind of glitch in reality. Story 9. I do some vlogging from time to time. Nothing major. I have about 100 subscribers. One of the things you have to do when posting videos is create a thumbnail. Sure, YouTube can grab a screenshot, but I like making my own. Once I uploaded a video but got distracted and never made the thumbnail right away. A few days later, I finally sat down to do it. I opened Photoshop, picked an image, added the text, and went to export it using my usual file naming convention. When I opened the folder to save it, there was already a file with the exact same name. Confused, I opened it, and it was the same thumbnail I had just made, with the same image and title, positioned exactly the same. But according to the folder, I had created it 3 days earlier. I had no memory of ever making it. I am a middle-aged man, no history of memory problems, barely drink, and do not use drugs. Yet somehow there was this finished thumbnail I swear I had not made. Honestly, the only way I could explain it to myself was that maybe I had respawned, like in a video game. But my memory had only saved before I created the image. It still freaks me out whenever I think about it. Story 10. When I was about 7 years old, my parents left me home alone for a quick store run, which was pretty normal in our small country town back then. I loved collecting rocks, so I was sitting behind our living room couch playing with them when our black cat walked past me. As it reached the end of the couch where it could see into the living room, its fur suddenly stood straight up and it began hissing aggressively, like it was terrified. Naturally, I leaned over to see what it was reacting to. That's when I saw large, invisible footprints pressing into the carpet, walking through the living room, down the hall, and straight into my parents' bedroom. I froze and stayed in that spot until my parents got back. When I told them what I saw, they brushed it off and assured me everything was fine. Years later, when I was a teenager, I found out that about 2 weeks before my experience, my stepdad had witnessed the exact same thing while he was home alone. That moment still gives me goosebumps. It turned out to be the first of several years of strange, haunting experiences that made my childhood rough. Story 11. I have 2 experiences that still creep me out. The first was a real-life glitch in the Matrix. I passed by a woman with 2 children in a store aisle, and only a couple of seconds later, I passed the exact same woman with the same 2 children again. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me that quickly. The second experience happened late one night around 11:30 in my quiet suburban neighborhood. Our doorbell rang, and standing there was a young woman in her 20s, crying and holding 2 car seats with her infant twins. She asked if she could use our phone. At first, I thought it was some kind of trick, but my husband answered the door. It turned out she was the girlfriend of our neighbor across the street, and he had locked her out before leaving with his handgun. That was the beginning of years of frightening domestic incidents we witnessed. Police were called multiple times, once even with a SWAT team surrounding his house. Another time, he hit her so hard she ran bleeding to our other neighbor's porch, begging them to call 911. Eventually, after they moved away, I learned through the news that she stabbed him in the neck during another fight. He survived, and the charges against her were dropped, which says a lot. That was the last I ever heard of them. Story 12. First, my parents live on a lake in the countryside. One winter day, my mom burst into my room yelling that a woman had fallen into the lake and was face down in the water. I ran down while my 70-year-old dad sprinted past me and jumped straight in. He hauled the woman up to me, and I grabbed her under the arms to lift her out. I stumbled backward, and she collapsed on top of me. Her skin was blue. She had already passed away from a stroke that caused her to fall in. Her husband, in his 90s, had been with her but couldn't help. It still haunts me. Second, in college, I worked at a legal office, and one night around 9, I stopped for gas downtown. 2 men in a truck gave me a bad feeling. As soon as I left, they began following me. My instincts screamed danger. I made 5 quick, random turns, but they were still behind me. Knowing the odds of them just happening to follow that exact route were almost zero, I drove into an area where I could make 4 sharp turns in a row. I did that, killed my headlights, and waited. They drove slowly past without seeing me. Third, another time, I was driving in the middle of nowhere to visit a friend. I ended up behind the same car for about 20 minutes. At a stop sign with no traffic, the car sat still for a full minute. Finally, I went to pass, but the driver cut me off. I reversed and he reversed. I tried to go around again, and he blocked me once more. My adrenaline spiked. Then suddenly, he just drove off slowly. I still don't know what that was about. Fourth, back in high school, I was home alone mowing the yard. When I finished, I came through the garage, closed the door, and clearly heard loud footsteps upstairs in my parents' room. I yelled, thinking it was my family, but got no response. Terrified, I grabbed my dad's pistol from the safe, chambered around loudly to send a warning, and called my parents. My dad told me not to go upstairs. I stayed hidden until he got home. When we checked, the door to the balcony off their room was wide open, but nothing had been taken. Story 13. I worked at a summer camp in the mountains for a couple of years as a teenager. Camp kids often made up silly stories about ghosts or Bigfoot, but there was one story that came up again and again, enough to make me uneasy. It started when an older staff member told me that years before, his girlfriend had felt watched at night. She said a huge black crow would sit outside her cabin window, staring at her in a way that felt wrong, almost human. Even if she closed the blinds, when she checked again hours later, it would still be there. Sometimes she saw it silently watching from the forest, following her with its gaze. She was convinced it was the same crow every time. Over the summers, I started hearing similar stories from campers, always the same details. A child would suddenly become withdrawn, scared to leave their cabin, sometimes asking to go home early. When pressed, a few admitted to being followed or watched by a crow near their cabin or in the woods. Some staff members even said they had seen it too. The ones who seemed genuinely shaken would refuse to talk about it further. They had nightmares, avoided going outside, and their whole week was ruined. I have seen plenty of crows up there, and they were just normal birds. But the way these kids described being watched and the consistency of the stories made it hard to dismiss. At first I thought it was silly, but after hearing it again and again from people who couldn't have shared details, you start to wonder, especially when you see how disturbed they are. It never felt like attention-seeking. It felt real. Story 14. Once I was at our local hookah lounge alone, waiting for my friends to join me. It was just me and the owner in the meantime. I left my hookah to run to the bathroom, and on the way back I had to pass a wall with a large opening that gave me a clear view of my spot. As I looked through the opening, I saw a girl sitting in my seat. She had long dark hair, average build, and was just sitting there casually as if she belonged. I was about to ask her what she was doing in my spot with my hookah when a small 4-inch section of wall briefly blocked my view for a couple of seconds. But when I passed that section and could see again, she was gone. There was no way for her to have left without walking past me, and my seat was at a dead end. I immediately asked the owner where the girl went and who she was, but he swore he had not seen anyone come in. Basically, it felt like some ghostly stranger had tried to smoke my hookah on my dime. Story 15. When I was about 6 or 7, I woke up in the middle of the night to the faint sound of plates being stacked in the kitchen every couple of minutes. My bedroom door gave me a direct view of the kitchen entrance, so I opened it and peeked out. To this day, I swear I saw an old woman standing there. Sunken eyes, mouth gaping unnaturally wide, head tilted almost 90 degrees, just staring at me without moving. The moment I looked, the sound stopped completely. At first, I thought maybe it was my eyes struggling to adjust to the dark. But the longer I stared, the clearer she became. We stood there, silently staring at each other, for what felt like several minutes. Finally, I bolted across the hall into my parents' room. I told them what I had seen, and they went to check, but nothing was there. Coincidentally, we had an early flight that morning to visit family, so everyone just stayed up and got ready. Maybe it was my young imagination playing tricks, but I will never forget that face. Story 16. A couple of army buddies and I went to Basel, Switzerland, and for some reason the city was completely deserted. It was the strangest thing I have ever experienced, and though I am sure there is some explanation, I have never figured it out. It happened in the summer of either 2006 or 2007. We had a weekend pass and ended up in Basel with plans to eat, get a hotel, and enjoy the evening. At first, everything seemed normal. The Autobahn was busy, and the first few blocks after we exited were filled with cars and people. But as we drove further, traffic thinned out until there were no cars, no pedestrians, just us. Thinking we had entered a restricted area, we turned back toward the Autobahn. Sure enough, traffic there was completely normal. We tried another exit, and the same thing happened. Crowds at first, then emptiness. Our next thought was that maybe there had been a terrorist attack or emergency, but there were no sirens, no announcements, nothing. Restaurants and cafes stood open, tables set outside, but not a single person in sight. We headed to the Hauptbahnhof, assuming it would be busy on a Friday evening. But when we parked outside, the silence became eerie. The station loomed dark and empty. No trains, no food vendors, no people. We decided not to go inside. Hungry, we checked restaurants. Doors stood open, candles lit on every table, menus displayed, yet not a soul. Finally, we found a waitress standing silently in one restaurant. Relieved, we tried speaking to her in every language between us, but she just stared. Eventually, she served us food without a word and then disappeared. The food itself tasted old and stale, as if it had been sitting for weeks. No noise came from the kitchen, no clatter of dishes, only silence. When she never returned, we went looking, but the restaurant was empty from top to bottom. We left money on the table and walked back toward our car. That was when we heard music, cheerful carnival music. Following the sound, we saw flashing lights from rides, food stands glowing, and even ponies walking in a circle. It looked like a festival in full swing. For a moment, we were overjoyed, planning to eat and ride everything. But as we drew closer, we realized it was just like the rest of the city. Everything running, but no people. Rides spun with no operators. Food stalls lit up with no workers. The entire place alive with noise and lights, yet utterly empty. That was our breaking point. We ran back to the car, sped out of the city, and didn't stop until we had left Switzerland altogether. To this day, it is still the most unsettling experience I have ever had. Story 17. My cousin was driving while I sat in the front seat. Suddenly, I saw a bike about to crash into us and gasped loudly. But the next moment, there was nothing there. My cousin asked what happened, and I told him I thought I had seen a bike coming straight at us. When we reached a stop sign, a biker suddenly appeared on our left. We were all startled since my hallucination had seemingly come true, and we laughed it off. As we kept driving straight, though, we noticed the biker staring at us. Instead of pulling into our driveway, we stopped and asked him if he needed something. He didn't answer, just kept staring in this unsettling way. So we decided to drive around the block a few times. That's when we realized the biker was following us. The faster we drove, the faster he pedaled to keep up. It didn't make sense, and the whole situation grew creepier. My sister, who was in the back seat, finally turned on her phone's flash to record him, and the moment she did, he took off and disappeared. To this day, I can't shake the thought that if I hadn't seen that strange vision of the bike beforehand, we would have gone straight home and he would have known exactly where we lived. Story 18. I had a baby monitor that turned on whenever my baby cried or moved enough to activate it. Each time it powered on, there was a little click right before the video feed appeared. My baby cried a lot, so I always kept it close, ready to go upstairs and pop the pacifier back in her mouth until she settled down. One night, while home alone, the monitor clicked. I grabbed it, and when the video turned on, I saw my baby lying in her crib with a hand holding the pacifier up to her mouth. Then the hand suddenly vanished. My blood ran cold. I sprinted upstairs, panicked, but found no one there, just my baby fussing lightly. As I calmed her, it hit me. What I had seen was actually my own hand. The monitor's first frame after activation always showed the last frame from when it was previously on. Normally it stayed active while I was in the room moving around, but for some reason it had turned off while I was still holding the pacifier. So the next time it clicked on, it replayed that frozen frame of me at her crib. Realizing the truth settled my mind, but the terror of that moment stuck with me. Even today, knowing exactly what happened, I still shiver when I think about it. Story 19. The strangest thing that ever happened to me was back in high school. My friends and I would sometimes go up to a dark park above a suburban neighborhood in Los Angeles County because it was one of the best places to see the stars. I had been there countless times with different people, and it was always quiet and peaceful. The park wasn't isolated either. There were 4 or 5 homes with backyards bordering it. One night I went with my girlfriend at the time, her sister, and my best friend. As we walked toward our usual spot, the silence of the night was suddenly broken by intense rustling in some bushes about 20 yards away. At first I tried to think of logical explanations, but nothing made sense. Then out stepped a man who looked fairly normal at a glance, but everything about him radiated wrongness. My instincts screamed at me, and I could tell my girlfriend and her sister felt it too. They immediately began pulling back with me. My friend, however, decided to walk toward the stranger. The man stood perfectly still watching us and didn't move a muscle. My girlfriend's sister begged my friend to come back, but he kept approaching until he was only a few yards away. That's when the man finally spoke. In a garbled, unnerving voice that sounded almost inhuman, he said, "Get out!" In that moment, even my reckless friend didn't argue. We all backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on him. Once we were far enough, he turned around in one smooth motion and vanished back into the bushes. We didn't go back to that park for a very long time, and even when we eventually did, we never saw him again. Story 20. When I was about 9 years old, I often slept over at my friend's house. We'd play video games, drink soda, and stay up late being kids. His mom had a new boyfriend who mostly kept to himself, either in the bedroom watching movies or sleeping. One night, after staying up late the previous evening, we both went to bed early. Instead of sleeping in my friend's bed like usual, I stayed in his stepbrother's room since it was empty. In the middle of the night, I felt someone lie down next to me. Thinking it was my friend, I shoved him in annoyance. The person got up and left the room. Moments later, I heard strange noises coming from my friend's room and thought he was upset because I had pushed him too hard. I went to check on him and was horrified to see the mom's boyfriend in his bed, completely unclothed. When he noticed me, he rushed over and told me that if I said anything, my friend would get into serious trouble. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I had seen, but the next day I asked my friend about it, and it became clear this had been happening for a while. I convinced him to ask his mom why her boyfriend acted so strange, sneaking into rooms at night. When we brought it up to her, the color drained from her face. Soon after, I ended up speaking with a counselor at school who asked me a lot of questions. My friend switched schools shortly after, and I believe the boyfriend went to jail. Looking back, I now realize the full weight of what was happening, and it still terrifies me. The memory of peering down that hallway, hearing my friend's muffled cries, and recalling the unsettling feeling of shoving that man off the bed is something that haunts me to this day. Story 21. My friend and I pulled into a public park way out in the country around midnight on a snowy New Year's Eve to smoke, snack, and wait for our other friends to come back from a party. As he was taking a hit, I looked out the car window. The only light was from the moon reflecting off the snow, but it was enough to see the entire empty parking lot in the edge of the woods. That's when I noticed movement. At first I thought it was animals, but soon realized it was 2 men walking along the tree line. Goosebumps shot through me, and I told my friend we should leave immediately. Just then, a police car drove up the access road. When I glanced back, the men were gone. The officer asked what we were doing. Nervously, we told him the truth. We were just waiting for friends. I was terrified he'd write us up for being in the park after hours or worse, but instead he asked if we had seen 2 men. I said I had seen them near the forest just before he arrived. He seemed satisfied, got back in his car, and drove off. Shaken, we left too and headed to one of our parents' houses nearby. When we got there, we told everyone what had happened. Later, while smoking on the back patio, I froze. Out of the darkness, crunching through the snow, came the same county deputy. My heart sank. It was eerie seeing him in a private backyard after just encountering him miles away. He asked again if we had seen the 2 men. We said no. He didn't explain, just wished us good night and walked back into the darkness. I still have no idea who those men were, why they were wandering through the woods with no lights, or why that cop was tracking them. Story 22. When I was around 8 to 10 years old, my family took a trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Being the oldest of 4 boys, my parents were busy with my younger brothers. I needed to use the restroom and went into the beach bathhouse alone. I was an outgoing kid, so I didn't hesitate to talk to strangers. Inside, I encountered an older man who looked oddly dressed and, in hindsight, probably homeless. He told me he really wanted to swim in the ocean, but couldn't because he didn't have a swimsuit. Then he asked if he could borrow mine. He stood in the handicap stall and gestured for me to come in and hand it to him. I thought it was strange, but as a kid, I was naive and about to comply. That's when a young man, maybe in his 20s, stormed in. He started shouting at the old man, then took my hand and led me out of the bathroom. Just as we got outside, my dad ran up, panicked, and thanked the stranger for finding me. To this day, my parents don't know the full story because I never told them. I'll never forget it, though. I was only seconds away from being trapped in that stall. Whoever that young man was, he probably saved my life. Story 23. My best friend's older brother has always been terrifying. He never hurt me, but he carried this presence that made you feel both protected and deeply unsettled. This was about 20 years ago when I was a junior in high school. Physically, he was intimidating. About 6'5" and 300 to 350 pounds of solid mass, with piercing ice blue eyes that looked unnatural, like he was wearing colored contacts. He radiated menace. I had seen him do disturbing things before, but the scariest moment was at a party. Two friends of ours started fighting, and a few of us tried to step in. He growled a single word, "No." The fighters froze, and so did we. Then he looked at them and ordered, "Hit him." With that, he manipulated them into beating each other mercilessly. His expression was a horrifying mix of pleasure and disgust, like he was savoring the violence. 30 people stood in silence as the sound of fists hitting flesh filled the air. Years later, my buddy asked me to check in on him while he was on vacation. I went to the liquor store where my friend had prepaid for enough alcohol to last a year. I brought it over. The brother was still massive but gaunt now, maybe under 200 pounds, and he reeked of decay. I sat with him as he drank straight from the bottle, his face twisted with absolute hate, never saying a word. I rambled nervously just to fill the silence. Then, without warning, he stood up, walked into his bedroom, and shut the door. That was it. No goodbye, no acknowledgement. Just an overwhelming sense of dread. He remains the most terrifying human being I've ever encountered. Story 24. When I was about 10, a group of us kids, including my little sister who was around 7, decided to go for a walk during a snowy no-school day in Canada. We bundled up in our winter gear and headed out. After a while, my sister pointed out a large black van with tinted windows creeping along behind us. We assumed at first they were just driving slowly in the snow or looking for an address. Still, we felt uneasy and started running as best we could in our heavy clothes until we lost sight of it. But minutes later, my sister spotted it again. The van was right behind us at the exact same distance as before. That's when real fear kicked in. We ran further this time, constantly checking over our shoulders. Once I looked back and saw nothing, only to look again seconds later and see the van right there again. My stomach dropped. We were panicking now. My sister lagged behind, and one of the older boys grabbed her arm and pulled her along so she wouldn't be left behind. I remember glancing back and seeing the van accelerate slightly, keeping pace with our desperate sprint. It felt like we were running forever, but we finally reached the babysitter's house. We bolted inside, slammed the door shut, and collapsed, gasping for air. We told her what happened, but she didn't seem to believe us. As we tried to calm down, I distinctly remember seeing that same van roll slowly past the house once or twice from the window. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe our young imaginations made it worse than it was. But even a decade later, I can't shake the conviction that the van was bad news. And I still believe noticing it when we did is what kept us safe. Story 25. When I was in college in one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in the US, I went out around 2 in the morning during finals week to grab a milkshake from McDonald's. This location had a 24-hour drive-through, but the lobby closed at 10. The layout of the parking lot was strange. You had to drive behind the building and loop around to get to the exit. I went through the drive-through, placed my order, and picked up my food. As I pulled out on the far side of the building, I noticed something in a dark corner of the lot that the employees inside couldn't see. Parked there was a white van, and lined up against it were 3 or 4 children. They looked about 7 to 9 years old, dressed in what seemed like black clothing, maybe even dresses. A small group of adults stood nearby, just watching them. The whole scene felt wrong on every level. Why were children out at that hour? Why against a van in a shadowy corner of a McDonald's lot? Why were people just standing there looking at them? My gut screamed at me, so I floored it out of there and immediately called the police. I never found out what happened after that, but I can't forget it. That road was infamous for being a corridor used by human traffickers, connecting two major highways at their closest point. To this day, I'm convinced I might have witnessed something horrifying in progress. Story 26. When I was in middle school, my mom had to pick up my best friend and me late one night because of a family emergency. We were driving home through a quiet suburban neighborhood when we stopped at a light. My friend and I noticed movement under a streetlight, a group of animals darting in and out of the shadows. The thing is, they didn't look like any animals we recognized. They were thin and long-limbed, with a strange scampering gait that seemed unnatural. There were several of them, and the way they moved filled me with dread. We sat frozen, staring until the light changed, then begged my mom to drive off quickly. She only remarked that it was weird, but my friend and I were so unsettled we avoided talking about it for years. Even now, we call them the things. And it took nearly a decade before we could even mention them to each other at night. A second, lighter moment happened recently. I live alone, and every morning my cat acts like he has never been fed in his life. He'll jump all over my furniture trying to get my attention. One morning, I was dead asleep when the lights in my room suddenly flicked on. My heart nearly stopped as I bolted upright, thinking someone had broken in. But there was my cat perched on the dresser, pawing at something on the wall, and he had managed to hit the light switch. It was terrifying in the moment, but also made me realize that my fight or flight instincts are useless. All I did was gasp and stare while my cat stood there, clearly proud of himself. Story 27. I was out walking my two dogs, one a 100-pound shepherd, Great Pyrenees mix, and the other a 40-pound shepherd shot husky mix, when I passed by a house party. About 20 minutes later, on my way back, I passed the same house again, this time walking along the backyard fence, which was short enough to see over. As I passed, a man in black pants, a black coat, and a hood walked quickly toward me. He had a heavy Eastern European accent and started asking about my dogs. He said, "Juan, those are beautiful dogs," and then added, "I bet if anyone tried to hurt you, they'd stop them." I said, "Probably." Then he said, "And that big one, I bet he would bite someone if they tried to touch you." The way he asked made me feel like he was testing me. The truth was that my big dog was gentle and would never bite anyone, but instead I lied and said, yes, he definitely would. He's bitten people before. Feeling uneasy, I texted my roommate, "Hey, I'm being followed." They immediately called me, asking where I was. I casually described my location so the man wouldn't catch on, and my roommate said, "Be right there." Meanwhile, the stranger kept asking questions. Where I got the dogs, what breed they were, how much they were worth. He was only a few feet away, close enough to touch them. Thankfully, my husky mix has a history of nipping, and she was standing between us, which gave me a little comfort. Then, just as the tension grew worse, my roommate came running up the street. The man dropped his head and walked quickly past, disappearing down the road. As we turned toward our neighborhood, a van pulled slowly around the corner. It stopped, headlights glaring on us, and I couldn't tell if the man got in or if he kept walking. Either way, it stayed there, watching. I squared my shoulders, lifted my shirt slightly, and pretended to reach for a gun at my hip. The van rolled away. We hurried home, shaken. I didn't walk the dogs for 6 months after that. Maybe it was kidnappers. Maybe it was dog nappers. Or maybe just a coincidence. But I'll never know for sure. Story 28. When I was about 11, I went with my grandparents and 2 older brothers to visit family in San Antonio. We spent 2 weeks seeing the missions, like the Alamo, Concepcion, San Juan, Espada, and San Jose, and stayed with my aunt. She told us about a supposedly haunted set of railroad tracks where a school bus full of children had once stalled and been struck by a train, killing everyone on board. The legend said that if you parked on the abandoned tracks, a ghost train would come, and unseen hands would push your car to safety. Naturally, my family wanted to try it. I begged them not to, but no one listened. We drove out, parked the van on the tracks, and shut it off. For 15 minutes, nothing happened. I was just starting to relax when the ground suddenly shook. The tracks rattled. A train whistle blared. The crossing arms, broken for years, clanged as if coming down. But the flat land stretched for miles and there was no train in sight. The whistle grew louder and the van suddenly jolted forward, rolling smoothly off the tracks as if pushed. The instant we cleared them, the noise and shaking stopped. We sat in stunned silence. Finally, we got out to check the bumper. The van was dusty from our trip, but now there were several small handprints clearly pressed into the dirt. My grandparents accused my brothers of pulling a prank, but when we compared hands, none matched. The prints were too small, child-sized. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it happened. That spot is real. You can look it up in San Antonio. If you ever go, maybe bring some candy to leave for the ghost children who keep saving strangers from the ghost train. Story 29. Back in college, I was at a party with my friend Sid, who I also had a crush on at the time. She got extremely drunk, falling over, can't hold herself up drunk. The only other guy there besides me was this creepy foreign student who gave off a vibe that instantly put me on edge. We played some card games, and at one point he tried to get everyone to play a spin the bottle. We laughed it off and moved on, but he kept focusing on Sid. At one point, Sid wanted to take a walk, and of course the creepy guy jumped at the chance. A block in, she puked her guts out. He acted awkward, helping her in this strange, almost possessive way, like a person trying to lead a puppy. Her girlfriend swooped in and took her to a bathroom to clean her up while he and I stood outside. He kept saying he wanted to go check on her, even though she was clearly fine with 3 friends helping her. The whole time he wore this unsettling, expectant look, like he was waiting for the chance to be alone with her. Eventually, we got her back to the dorm. She was still sick, and at one point he told everyone to leave, saying he would handle it. She was wearing a skirt, and the way he insisted on being alone with her sent alarms through me. Her roommate and I exchanged a look and both stepped in, basically telling him she needed to go to bed and that he could leave. I was drunk myself, but in that moment I knew I couldn't let him get a chance to be alone with her. I never told Sid what happened that night. I hoped her roommate did, because the guy's behavior was beyond creepy. At the time, I second-guessed myself, wondering if I was misreading things because of cultural differences or my own drunken state. But looking back, I'm so glad I trusted my instincts. Everything about him screamed danger, and I think her roommate and I may have prevented something terrible. Story 30. One summer day almost 10 years ago, I was riding ATV trails in northern Wisconsin with my uncle. The family dog ran alongside us, excited and full of energy. My uncle sped up, and the dog followed, leaving me behind as they pulled further ahead. That's when I noticed how quiet the forest had become. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. I slowed to a stop. The forest around me no longer looked like the sunny, vibrant place it had been moments before. It seemed twisted and dead, the trees bare and sickly, no sound of birds or wind. My hair stood on end as I realized something was watching me. Behind a tree stood a figure, almost like a dog but not. It was tall, around 6 feet, sickly with patches of missing hair, long thin fingers clutching the bark, and massive yellow eyes fixed directly on me. It just stared. The moment stretched into what felt like forever until suddenly I felt warmth on the back of my neck. I turned and saw the sunlight breaking through, and when I looked back, the forest was alive again. Lush green trees swayed in the breeze, birds sang, and everything was normal, like nothing had ever happened. My uncle reappeared moments later, but he didn't smile or joke. He just said, "We need to go home." I don't know what he saw, but I know he saw something. We left and never went down that trail again. Even now, after years of hunting, camping, and exploring the outdoors, I've never experienced anything remotely like it. It felt like I had witnessed the forest die and then be reborn right in front of my eyes. Story 31. I stopped at a shop after school on a rainy day, my clothes still damp and clinging. A man nearby began making unsettling remarks about me and even suggested I go with him. I froze, feeling deeply uncomfortable and afraid. Suddenly, another person walked up as if they knew me and said warmly, "Hey Jess, I've been looking for you everywhere. You said you were going to check out the Lego, come with me." Jess wasn't my name, but I instantly understood and gave him a thankful look. Once we were out of earshot, he asked if I had a parent nearby. I didn't, so he asked if I knew their numbers so he could call them, and he promised to wait with me until they came. He was careful, kind, and clearly wanted me to feel safe. I only lived a block away, so my parents came quickly, thanked him, and I said goodbye. I never saw him again, but I still hope he knows how grateful I am. Story 32. I had a terrible case of tonsillitis while staying at my parents' house for vacation. The change in weather hit me hard, and I was coughing nonstop. Around 3 in the morning, I heard what I thought was my mom's footsteps coming down the hall. It made sense. I was hacking so badly she might have been bringing water or medicine. I heard the steps reach my door, and then someone walked right in. At first, I thought it was her. The figure stood at the foot of my bed near the window, wearing clothes my mom used to wear when I was a kid. But something was wrong. This mom was taller, bigger, and had no expression at all. Just a blank, emotionless face staring at me. I called out Mom several times, but there was no response. Imagine coughing yourself raw at 3 a.m. while your mother just stands there silently, staring. Finally, I turned on my phone's flashlight and shined it directly at her. Instantly, the figure vanished into thin air. My door had been locked from the inside, which made it even more impossible. And here's the strangest part. When I woke up the next morning, my tonsillitis was completely gone. The day before, I couldn't even swallow water, but now the pain had disappeared entirely. I still get chills thinking about it, and to this day, I can't explain what happened. Story 33. We took a day trip across the southern border, shopping at the mercado, bar hopping, enjoying cervezas. At one point, we spotted this little hole-in-the-wall place just off the main road. A neon sign with a simple logo and "Open" displayed drew us in. The moment we stepped inside, it felt like we had walked into a time machine. The place looked like a saloon straight out of the Wild West. Cobwebs, dim amber lights, a huge piano in the corner, an old jukebox, tables and chairs scattered around, and not another soul in sight. There were 6 of us, and as we were looking around and feeling the tension build, the proprietor finally emerged from the back. He looked like something out of a movie, looming and strange. But surprisingly, we had an incredible time. The food was amazing, the drinks were cold, and the music kept us going. The man even played piano and took requests while we sang and danced. We stayed for a couple of hours before heading out to explore other places and grab gifts before sunset. When the bullfights were canceled, we decided to head back there one more time before crossing back to the U.S. By then, the sun had set and some of the group felt uneasy about being out at night in Mexico. When we returned, the building was chained off and boarded up. The sign and markings were gone. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. We tried convincing ourselves we had the wrong place, but everything nearby was exactly as we remembered. The taco stand, the shack selling cigarettes, the pharmacy, the other bar we had debated going into, even the broken-down truck parked out front. We went home uneasy, laughing it off as some strange closing routine. The next day we asked locals who regularly crossed the border if they knew about the bar. Not one person had ever heard of it. They insisted the place had been closed forever. Curious, we walked back across to check during the day, but it was the same, boarded up and clearly long abandoned. No one in the area could explain what we had experienced. Story 34. In 2017, my mom passed away. My husband and I had just moved back to Florida, so I flew up to my hometown in Virginia for 2 weeks to handle everything that comes with losing a parent. I loved her deeply. It was awful. I desperately wanted a dream or a sign from her, something to let me know she was okay, that she loved me, and that there was something beyond this life. My 10-year-old niece ended up having a dream visit from her, and while I was happy for her, I couldn't help but feel envious. Why not me? Why not? The night I returned home, I was doing laundry and telling my husband about my niece's dream. I mentioned how people often talk about finding coins, a penny, a dime, after a loved one passes, as if they were little signs left behind. I told him I wished for something bigger than just a coin, something undeniable. As I dug through the laundry basket fresh from the dryer, I found 10 crisp $1 bills. They were brand new, serial numbers in perfect sequence, not folded, perfectly flat. They hadn't gone through the wash. They were cold to the touch, not warm like the clothes they were buried in. It was impossible to explain. I broke down sobbing, convinced my mom had answered me in the only way she could. My husband held me as I cried. being patient and steady while I completely unraveled. To this day, I believe those bills were her sign, her way of letting me know she was still with me. Story 35. I love surf casting, fishing from the ocean shore, and last October I decided to try a tough-to-reach spot near me with great bottom structure, known for striped bass. The place is notoriously dangerous, slippery rocks, huge waves, strong currents, and deep water. It's also infamous for accidents and drownings. Still, I went. The shoreline there is only about 200 yards long, with 50 to 60-foot bluffs cutting it off. There's only one path down on the eastern side, and the west end is a sheer cliff. I hiked down after dark in foggy weather and fished for a couple of hours. Eventually, I hooked a fish and turned on my headlamp to unhook it. Suddenly, I heard a scream about 20 feet to my right. I jumped, but it turned out another fisherman was there. Between the fog and the crashing waves, neither of us had realized we weren't alone. After a laugh, we fished together for a few more hours. When we parted ways, he said he was going to fish an outcropping further west, now that the tide had dropped. About an hour later, the fog cleared as the sun came up. I decided to check how my fishing buddy had done before leaving. I walked all the way to the end of the beach, but he wasn't there. And there's no way he could have passed me. There was almost no space between me and the bluff, and I had the only path back to the top in clear sight. To this day, I'm convinced of one of two things. Either I fished with the ghost of someone who had died there, or I spent hours fishing with a man who drowned that night. Either way, it chills me, and I'll never go back to that spot again. Story 36. When I was about 17 or 18, I lost my best friend Sarah in a car accident. It was my first real experience with death, and I didn't handle it well. 3 months later, I felt unusually exhausted and decided to nap, something I rarely did. I dreamed I was visiting another friend, Stacy, who in the dream lived in Sarah's old house. That night, as I lay down, Sarah appeared to me as a ghost. She said she couldn't talk long, but told me to meet her at the train station at 7 a.m. the next morning. In the dream, Stacy and her husband humored me, drove me there, and to their shock, Sarah actually appeared. She told me she was sorry she had to leave so soon, that she loved us, and asked me to pass her goodbye to her loved ones. I asked if I could hug her, and she said she would try. I felt it. It worked. Then I woke up, tears on my face. That same day, odd things kept happening. At City Hall with my friend Laura, we saw a little girl who looked just like Sarah when she was young, and her name was also Sarah, spelled the same unusual way. Later at Walgreens, I saw a woman wearing the exact antique ring Sarah used to wear. Only 18 existed in the world, and Sarah had inherited hers from her grandmother. The woman said hers came from her mother. That all happened in a single day. Only Laura knew about my dream. 6 months later, Stacy actually moved into Sarah's old house, something I had seen only in the dream. Around that time, I had another dream of Sarah, and so did Laura. In both dreams, we were in a car together. I told Laura mine, and she finished it from her perspective. Down to waking up at the same moment I did, even though she lived 4 hours away. I eventually told Sarah's mother, 20 years later, about the dream where Sarah gave me her message. She cried with relief. She said she had been trying for years to reach Sarah through different means but never got any sign. Hearing what I told her made her believe Sarah had chosen me to carry her final goodbye. She said that explained why she could never reach her, because Sarah had already left her farewell with me. I'm not sure what to believe, coincidences, dreams, or something more. But all I know is that Sarah's mother thanked me as if I had given her the greatest gift in the world. Story 37. A few years ago, I was living in a big city and sharing an apartment with a flatmate. One night I came home from a party around 3 in the morning, a little drunk, with my headphones in. The building was mostly businesses, with only the 5th floor reserved for apartments. I punched in the code at the first door, then the second, and headed toward the elevator. That's when I noticed a really tall guy, easily 2 meters, standing behind me. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe he lived there too, or was a delivery guy. We got into the elevator together. I pressed for the top floor and so did he. When we got out, I wished him good night, and he wandered around as if he didn't know where he was going. I unlocked my apartment, slipped off my heels so I wouldn't wake my flatmate, and stepped inside. But as I started to close the door, the man suddenly appeared again, jamming his foot in the doorway and trying to push his way inside. Completely confused, I whispered, "Get away." He said, "Don't be afraid. I just want to charge my phone." That's when it hit me. He wasn't supposed to be there. Somehow I managed to push him out and slam the door. To this day, I think the only reason it worked was because I was whispering. Maybe he thought I was more afraid of waking up someone in the apartment than I was of him. In reality, I was just drunk and didn't fully understand how dangerous the situation was. I didn't even call the police. I just went to bed. But the next morning when I woke up sober, the reality crashed down on me. I had a full-on panic attack, realizing how close I'd come to something terrible. Story 38. From 2012 to 2021, I worked in combat air support, combat search and rescue, and counterterrorism for the U.S. Air Force, and later with three-letter agencies. I've seen a lot of people die in horrific ways, but two incidents never left me: the Dud missile and the man on the motorcycle. The Dud missile happened when we were tracking two Taliban fighters moving an old Russian anti-aircraft gun. Our strategy in those situations was usually to target the middle of the group, letting fragmentation hit everyone. But one of the men stepped directly into the path of the AGM-114 missile. It struck his back, didn't detonate, and instead his body tore apart like one of those old crash test dummy toys from the 90s. His chest just vanished. His companion wasn't physically injured, but was drenched in gore. We had no audio, but the way he sat down, shaking uncontrollably, you could tell his mind had shattered in that instant. That image stuck with me more than the strike itself. The second incident was a courier we had hunted for months. We finally got clearance to take the shot while he was riding alone in the hills of northeastern Afghanistan. Hitting a moving motorcycle in that terrain is incredibly difficult, and we only grazed him with shrapnel. He crashed, flipped multiple times, and ended up pinned under his burning bike. His spine was clearly severed. He couldn't move. The fuel leaked and the flames spread. We begged command for permission to re-attack and put him out of his misery. They denied us, saying it would be a waste of resources, so we had no choice but to watch him burn alive, trapped and alone in the desert. Of everything I witnessed, those two moments never left me. It wasn't just death. It was the cruelty of it. Story 39. When I was 18, I was in a horrific car accident. My friend was driving a lifted Dodge Ram, and he ran a red light. We were struck by another lifted Dodge Ram, of all things. The impact sent us rolling into a light pole. I was in the passenger seat. My friend was in the middle. Two boys were riding in the bed. One jumped out at the last second, somehow surviving with only a broken ankle. The other ended up in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. The driver had a concussion and a deep gash on his arm, plus road rash. I suffered fractured hips, broken discs, and other injuries. My friend in the middle seat didn't make it. I was knocked unconscious on impact. When I came to, I was pinned beneath the truck. My memories are fragmented, screaming, begging for someone to call my dad, drifting in and out of consciousness. At one point, a bystander who had seen the crash found me, grabbed my hand, and kept telling me I was going to be okay. I begged them not to let me die. Then out of nowhere, a different sensation washed over me. Calm, peace. And then I felt her, my friend who had died. I knew instantly she was gone, but I also knew she was with me. She told me I would be okay. I believed her. Later in the ambulance, the paramedics asked me who the president was, and I said George Bush, even though Obama was in office. My brain was scrambled. I didn't know who I was, what day it was, or how I'd gotten there. But I knew with absolute certainty that she was dead. No one had told me yet, but she already had. To this day, I can't explain it. It was like she crossed over just long enough to reassure me. That peace I felt in the middle of all the chaos is something I'll never forget. Story 40. Between 8th and 9th grade, I was at my girlfriend's house with her and a mutual friend. As night fell, we sat around a small fire in the backyard, making s'mores, talking, laughing. Then we heard it, a deep, rhythmic buzzing, low and steady, coming from nowhere we could see. A few seconds later, we spotted it, a massive triangular object floating slowly overhead. It couldn't have been more than 45 to 50 feet above us, shockingly low for an aircraft. It was an equilateral triangle in shape, with a circular light at each corner and a larger one in the center. Its body was a dark blackish color, barely distinguishable against the night sky. It hovered directly above us in the house for a moment, then continued past until the sound faded into the distance.